crowd. When I saw the snow last night, I wondered even if Lester was going to make it out, but he didn't even know we had snow out here today. I'm Becky Hope. My parents started this program. We call this our 36th season, but we actually, really 38 years ago, it was established at the Methodist Church. And Lester and I were just discussing how long he's been coming out. Well, Dad found him at the homestead visiting his parents, and he's been coming ever since. And just knew that he was going to be an exciting presenter, and we are so happy how loyal he is with his connection to the homestead and just enjoying books and this crowd. So I wanted to just give you a couple other points. I have a clipboard in the back, and if you're not on my email list and would like to be, to get once a month emails about our next program, it's on the back table on the left, my left. And we have 2 more programs this year, and then in June we'll be planning the next season. And so on April 10th, Dan Hopler is coming to discuss the book about Lincoln's Killer, and then we ended with May 15th with Kathy Hubbard and Linda Sullivan discussing the anxious generation, which I think we can all relate to. So anyway, Lester, what a wonderful career, what a wonderful citizen. He grew up in the western suburbs, graduated from Glenbard West High School, but has been in Chicago for many years, and over the years we have connected through many different ways in addition to Books Between Bites, and I'm just going to have you come on up because I know all these people here want you to talk about these books. We've added 2 more, and then of course you're going to be asking him questions. We know. His expertise on the Cubs, maybe something on the football story. So,
thank you, Becky. It's a real privilege for me to be back here. I feel at home here somehow. As Becky mentioned, I grew up in Glen Ellen. My parents spent their final years at Homestead. My father helped to build Homestead at one time. And for example, just why I would feel, I knew Harry Exdam, who is now a building over there. I mean, that's how wrapped up I am in all of this. And I came here first when Books Between Bites was in the basement of the Methodist Church. Becky's father was presiding at that time. So I think I might have been here 27 or 28 times. And I hope I can come back next year. I'm 84 years old. Now, as you can see, I've added a couple of books to what you knew was going to happen. But we have the football game that changed America. That is the story of the Super Bowl and how the Super Bowl Sunday became a secular holiday in this country. The Stadium by Frank Guidry is a story of the financing of stadiums and racial issues in stadiums. Unfortunately, the book does not talk about our situation here, where we are wondering what's going to happen with the Chicago Bears and Soldier Field. But I will be spending most of my time on the Pete Rose biography by Keith O'Brien. Now, as some of you may recall, in order to qualify as a sports book, my criterion is the writer of a sports book must first have read a book. Any book. Now that eliminates a fantastic number of sports books. So these are the 3 best right here, and they might be the 3 only that qualify under my criteria. I need a little bit of context here so I can put this book where it ought to be, and you have some idea of its background. The author, Keith O'Brien, grew up in Cincinnati. He was a fan of Pete Rose. As he writes early in the book, he did this book with feelings of pride, disgust, frustration, pity, and confusion. And you will see why as we go through the story of Pete Rose. Also, Keith O'Brien was able to interview Rose for 27 hours until Rose finally said, "Okay, I've had enough." I am not sure that I envy O'Brien spending 27 hours with Pete Rose. Maybe. What you can decide for yourselves as we go through. And then also a further item of context. Beginning this spring, by the best estimates, 25 million young people will be playing baseball somewhere in the United States this spring. Over the years, 16,000 men have become excellent enough in baseball that they have made it to the major league level. One more item of context. Sports gambling, as most of you know, has become legalized. That happened in a Supreme Court case in the year 2018. Sports gambling has known exponential growth. It is now legal to gamble on sports in 39 states, and sports gambling is no further away from you than your telephone. You are now able to make all sorts of bets on your phone, and oddly enough, Major League Baseball, which banned Pete Rose from the Hall of Fame for life for gambling, Major League Baseball is now a partner with gambling organizations. If you go to Wrigley Field and you look at the right field corner of that historic stadium, there is what? A sports gambling building, 17,000 square feet, $11 million worth of construction put up by Tom Ricketts, the owner of the Chicago Cubs. His partner in that space is DraftKings. If you listen to the radio, if you watch any sports event on television, you see those insufferable ads from DraftKings explaining how you can make a profit if you just bet on sports. One of the more bogus statements that we have in our culture right now. As a Cub fan, I would prefer that Tom Ricketts had spent $11 million on a power hitter and not on the sports booking operation. And then one more item of context, and that is when I moved from practicing law in Wheaton to becoming a sports writer, this story, the Pete Rose story, was one of my first assignments. So I have a personal interest, particularly in the final stages of the Pete Rose story, where I did a lot of reporting for a newspaper called the National Sports Daily. It was a wonderful newspaper. We had a talented staff. It was, however, a failure as a business. It lasted only a year and a half. But I had a lot of fun working there, and in particular working on the Pete Rose story. Now, who was Pete Rose? A white working class guy, grew up in the Midwest, in Ohio, in Cincinnati. His father was the most famous semi-pro athlete in Cincinnati. He was a star baseball player and a star football player in sandlot games. His mother, her name was Laverne Blowbaum. I love the name, Laverne Blowbaum. Her brother, Buddy Blowbaum, was, guess what, a bookie. So right from the beginning, we have gambling from the day Pete Rose arrived on this earth. Pete later did some gambling with Buddy Blowbaum. We'll get to that. Rose grew up near Crosley Field, the first baseball field where he established his excellence as a great player. He was a decent football player in high school. He was not the best of students in high school, as you might guess, if you look at any of his 5 autobiographies that he has published. Needless to say, those autobiographies never made it onto this program for obvious reasons. His first pro contract was with the Geneva, New York Redlegs, a farm team of the Cincinnati Reds. It was a Class D team. He got the job there. He was pestering the GM, the general manager of the team, and finally the general manager realized he was a few players short of a complete roster, and so he signed Rose and he paid him $7,000 for the season. The Reds organization did not think much of him. He was not on their list of hot prospects. He filled in on a spot that had been open on the team for some time, and the Reds thought that he lacked polish, talent, power as a hitter, and ability. However, in that very first season, he established himself as a hitter. He hit a lot of singles and doubles, which was what he did throughout his career. He was voted the most popular player in Geneva, New York, by the fans of the team, and for that, he was awarded not a car, but a brand new suitcase. Off to a flying start was Pete Rose. He then went to the Tampa Tarpons. Tarpon, by the way, for some of you, is a fish. If any of you talked to my father for more than 20 minutes, he would be talking to you about the tarpon that he used to catch in Florida. So it's a familiar thing of our family. There on the Tampa Tarpons, his manager was a former ball player named Johnny Vandermeer. Some of you, I'm looking here, are old enough to remember Johnny Vandermeer. He once pitched 2 consecutive no-hitters, an almost incomprehensible achievement. It would never happen today. Vandermeer did recognize some talent. He recommended to the Reds that they promote him to the next level of the minor league teams, and that was the Macon, Georgia Peaches. Minor league teams have the best names. There's the Lansing Lug Nuts, the Birmingham Biscuits, and now we have the Tampa Tarpons and the Macon Peaches. About this time, Rose was establishing himself as a hitter, and they began to pay him a little more money, and he did something he did for the rest of his life. He bought a fancy car. He bought a lime green colored Corvette so he could flash around and do whatever he wanted to within that car. During that minor league season with the Macon Peaches, he played, during spring training of that minor league season, he played a game against the New York Yankees. Mickey Mantle and Whitey Ford were there for that game, and they noticed that Pete Rose was a bit of a hot dog, and that he would sprint to first base when he got a walk. Players now, they get a walk and they spend 2 minutes undoing their gloves and taking it up and giving stuff to the bat boy. Pete Rose would throw his bat down and race to first base, hoping somebody would drop the ball and he could get to second base. It rarely happened, but he always sprinted to first base. Mickey Mantle looked at that and he said, "This guy, there's something wrong with him. He's Charlie Hustle." And Rose, having heard Mickey Mantle label him as Charlie Hustle, he adopted that and made it his brand, and it becomes the title of this book. And he was known as Charlie Hustle throughout his baseball career and beyond. He met his first wife about this time. Where did he meet her? At the racetrack, of course. We have Uncle Buddy, the bookie. Now we have a wife he meets at the racetrack. Her name was Carolyn with a K, and they had 2 kids. He also, during this early period, connected with a baseball writer by the name of Earl Lawson. Earl Lawson was known as Scoops. And Lawson, from that time forward, until Lawson retired, was a writer who supported Pete Rose. He was one of many writers. Pete Rose was willing to sit and talk with us sports writers endlessly. He knew that would be a good thing for him, for his career, for his salary, and he would talk to baseball writers endlessly. We had a writer here in Chicago by the name of Jerome Holtzman. Jerome Holtzman was the so-called dean of baseball writers. Rose knew that and immediately became great friends with Jerome Holtzman. I can remember when Rose was suspended, I was in a scrum of reporters that included Jerome Holtzman. And even though we now knew what Rose had done, we knew he was in trouble, Holtzman had nothing but positive thoughts about him, and he wrote that in the Tribune that day. So Rose always had connections to us writers that helped him along the way. Another thing that Rose managed to do is he figured out how to market himself as a personality. He knew that as a white player, companies would prefer him to the black players who were the stars of the era. And he took great advantage of that, and early in his career was bringing in all sorts of extra money because he knew how to market himself. Many other players disliked him. He was a bit of a hot dog, as I said. They didn't think much of him sprinting to first base. They didn't like his ego, which was quite toxic. He could talk about himself for hours. But he somehow connected with the black players. He became a great friend of black players for the rest of his career. In the 1967 All-Star Game, the first 5 people in the National League lineup were Lou Brock, Roberto Clemente, Henry Aaron, Orlando Cepeda, and Dick Allen. And we didn't even get to Willie Mays yet. But at that time, black players reigned supreme over baseball. That is no longer the case. Now, each year, there are fewer black players in baseball. We're now down to 7% of the rosters of the major league teams. Latin players increase in number. As you may have noticed, Japanese players increase in number, and Korean players. But black players are reduced in the percentage that make it into Major League Baseball. One of the central incidents when Pete Rose finally got to the major leagues and was becoming a star was the 1970 All-Star Game. In this game, the National League was trying to win for the 12th time in 14 years. They were clearly superior, player by player, over the American League. Rose was in the lineup. It was a tight game. Rose was on second base. Somebody hits a single, and Rose is racing to the plate. He was off with the hit, and as he comes into home plate, the catcher, Ray Fosse, is there, crouched in the base path, blocking the plate. Rose could have tried to slide around him. He could have tried to slide head first the other way around him, but Rose decided no, that was not going to work, and so he came crashing into Rose the way a football player would try to block another player. Fosse was seriously injured. His career was never what it could have been. I mean, there he was on the All-Star team, but after that, he was never on an All-Star team. And that became a signature turning point in Rose's life. another one of these things that did not increase his popularity with other baseball players, particularly the white guys. The writer of this book, Keith O'Brien, spends 8 pages on the collision with Ray Fawcett. 8 pages. I think you could probably do it in a paragraph, but he devoted 8 pages to it, and it's typical of this book. There's a lot of play-by-play baseball. The count is 2-1. Rose looks at the pitch. I mean, a lot of incredible detail on various at-bats and various plays and various games. The Rose very quickly became an excellent student of the game of baseball. He was able to keep track of what pitchers were doing, analyze it, and build up in his mind a realistic expectation of what the next pitch would be. For somebody who was not an A student in physics, he had a remarkable facility for analyzing what the pitchers were doing. Frequently, he knew what was coming, and that allowed him to accumulate more hits than anybody in the history of the game. In the 1973 playoff game against the Mets, Tom Seaver was pitching. Tom Seaver at that time was the best pitcher in all of baseball. As a Cub fan, let me tell you, it pains me to say this. He used to kill the Cubs. So Seaver is pitching, known throughout baseball as Tom Terrific. And O'Brien in the book goes through the entire at-bat, and he clearly had gone through this at-bat with Rose. They must have had a video of each pitch, because he devotes a half a page to each pitch, and then he has Rose thinking, okay, he just went outside on me twice. I know he's going to want to come inside, and it's probably going to be a little high because the outside pitches were low. And he goes through this incredible thought process, and sure enough, the pitch comes in exactly where Rose expected it, and he hits it out of the park. Tom Seaver. But that is typical of the expertise that somehow, it was the home run, by the way, won the game. And that's typical of the way Rose mastered the art of hitting and why he was able to hit so well for so long. Later in his career, he came back to the Reds as a player-manager. Very unusual thing in baseball. Some of you remember Lou Boudreau, who was a great broadcaster with the Chicago Cubs. He was a player-manager as a shortstop on the Cleveland Indians, won a World Series, I think, in 1948. We have a Cleveland Indians fan right here. But when he came back to the Reds, he was in pursuit of a Ty Cobb record that everybody agreed was unbreakable, would never be approached. Ty Cobb had 4,191 base hits in the course of his career. And Rose was sneaking up on that record. And finally, in 1985, September, he was at a point where he was going to break the record. And the record was so unbreakable that seemingly every baseball writer in the United States was now following Rose. There was 100 people would show up in the press rows every single game as he got these last few hits. He finally was playing in Cincinnati in his home stadium. He's up against a pitcher named Eric Shaw. Eric Shaw was a rare top 1% intellect in the world of baseball. He read books, he commented on political things. He was a movement, as they say in politics, a movement conservative. He always had something to say, usually not about baseball, but he was a pretty decent pitcher. And he now is facing Pete Rose, and sure enough, Rose hits a single to left center. He breaks the record, and now all hell breaks loose in the Cincinnati Stadium. There's a standing ovation that lasts for 7 minutes. That is a very long standing ovation. And his son, Pete Rose Jr., comes running out to first base. And there's Rose, the tough guy, in tears. Nobody can believe it. Eric Shaw, smartass that he is, sits down on the mound to enjoy the spectacle. He doesn't continue to warm up. He sits down and is shaking his head like this. So he broke the record, and we'll come back to this. He was wearing a white Cincinnati Reds jersey, his number 14, and he used a black Mizuno bat. Mizuno is a Japanese company that manufactures baseball equipment, among other things. And we will come back to that. From the very beginning of his life, Rose was a gambler. As I mentioned, he met his first wife at the track. When he, at one point, left the Cincinnati Reds as a free agent to go to the Philadelphia Phillies, there was a dinner in his honor in which various players and others roasted Pete Rose. George Foster was one of the great players of the Cincinnati Reds. They had World Series teams that featured Rose and George Foster. George Foster was a guy who never was close to Pete Rose. Foster organized Bible studies within the Reds locker room, and that certainly wasn't something that Pete Rose was going to be attending. But Foster was up before the audience at a giant roast in Cincinnati, and he said, as Rose was departing to Philadelphia, Pete Rose always took time to help others. He was a great humanitarian. He was always helping young people. Football, basketball, hockey, baseball. He taught young people how to bet on them all. That was Foster's tribute to Pete Rose. And he mentioned baseball. That was people in the audience who knew things about baseball. They knew that was a very bad warning sign. Because in every baseball locker room, there is a sign on the wall about rule number 21. Rule 21 is now on the wall in every locker room in English and in Spanish. Pretty soon, at the rate we're going, it'll be on the wall in Japanese and Korean. And that rule says, any player, umpire, or club or league official or employee who shall bet any sum whatsoever on any baseball game in connection with which the bettor has a duty to perform shall be declared permanently ineligible. If you were not connected to the game, you could be suspended for 1 year. But and the bettor has a duty to perform shall be declared permanently ineligible. In other words, a ban for life. Pete Rose was in violation of that for a number of years. His gambling began at the racetrack. He developed a routine that he called the triple header. After a day game, he would go to the racetrack, to the dog track, and to the highlight court. Highlight is a game, some of you may have seen it, it's popular in Florida. It's a pari-mutuel betting game. So this was Rose's way of spending his evening. Horses, dogs, highlight, all of them for betting. Rose knew about the rule, Everybody in baseball knew about the rule. The Baseball Players Union is probably the best led, the most powerful, and the most successful labor union in the history of American labor. It has accomplished more for its constituents than any other union. Electrical workers, carpenters, anybody. The union, which can bargain anything to the advantage of players, stays away from the gambling rule. They leave it alone. It's there on the wall, and it's in full force. The union never tried to make any changes, and they probably never will. Rose, as O'Brien points out in this book, knew of those who had been in trouble for gambling. Leo DeRocher was banned for 1 year from baseball for merely being seen with some gamblers. He hadn't even made any bets. Now we know who Leo DeRocher is. He was the manager of the Cubs' most tragic team. And that is saying something. We've had some tragic teams. He was the manager of the 1969 Cubs. The 1969 Cubs had Hall of Fame players in the lineup: Ferguson, Jenkins, Ernie Banks, Ron Santo, Billy Williams. The 1969 Cubs should have been in the World Series and should have swept the World Series. We who are Cub fans know this. Think about this. Here I am in 2025 as a Cub fan, still angry about the 1969 series. I'm 84 years old. You think I could mature beyond this? No chance. Leo DeRocher was the manager of that team, and what does he do? In August, he had a girlfriend named Lynn Goldblatt of the Goldblatt's department store chain, then profiting beautifully. And he leaves the team for 4 days to go to her son's camp in Wisconsin, where he could strut around like a big shot. Leo DeRocher, unforgivable, beyond unforgivable. So I blame him for the loss. I'm on a tangent now. Okay. Other ball players had been in trouble on gambling. Tris Speaker, Ty Cobb, Denny McClain, a guy who could pitch. He married Lou Boudreaux's daughter. They lived here in the Chicago area, south suburbs. He was suspended for 3 months, again for associating with a gambler, just associating. Rose, although he began gambling at the horse track, quickly discovered the joys of gambling with bookies. At the time he was doing this, it was completely illegal. His first bookie, as O'Brien points out very nicely in the book, was a guy named Alphonse Esselman, and he had a sports book that he operated from a car lot in Cincinnati. Immediately, gambling with Esselman, Rose fell behind and was not paying his debts. He would lose and he would not pay. Esselman, because Rose was a local hero, went along with him longer than he would with any other gambler. This was the beginning of a cycle for Rose of debt, denial, delusion, and deception. It reached a point in Cincinnati where fans would see him at the dog track, the horse track, or at High Line, or at Esselman's car lot, and they would call the Reds, the team, to report his gambling. There are records of numerous calls that O'Brien dug up as part of this. Beginning with Esselman, he always had a bookie. And then he had a guy in his group named Tommy Giosa, who was a would-be baseball player. He was a worshiper of Pete Rose, and Pete made him his gopher. He would pay the bets, he would pick up the winnings, and among other things, Tommy made arrangements. Pete would have girls coming to visit him in Cincinnati. He would put them up in a hotel, and Tommy was in charge of the transportation from the airport to hotels. He took care of all that business for Pete Rose's several girlfriends. As I said, Pete Rose began a pattern of debt and denial. He was always behind in his bets. Rose at one point began to hang out in a gym right near the ballpark in Cincinnati, Gold's Gym. It was a place where there were numerous bodybuilders. It was a center of traffic in steroid drugs and in cocaine. He became great friends with a guy named Paul Jansen. Paul Jansen was a bodybuilder who was something of a notorious character in Cincinnati. He had so many muscles, and they were so big that he could flex and his shirts would rip. It's like a parlor trick, but you have to be I don't think Arnold Schwarzenegger in his prime could do that, but Paul Jansen could. So he was a famous guy, and he also was taking care of Pete's bets, and in a short period of time, Rose owed him $67,000. Then as the betting increased in its momentum, he was using East Coast mobsters as a source for his bookies and his bets. It became very obvious, particularly when he was the player manager of the Reds, that this was a problem. The magazine Sports Illustrated began looking into this. There was a reporter by the name of Jill Lieber who was leading the pack on this. She was able to get information that others could not. There was an editor at Sports Illustrated, a guy named Sandy Padway, and Padway, I later went to work for Sandy Padway. He was one of the great editors in the history of sports journalism, and he knew this was a big story, and he finally assigned 5 people to work on this, what editors like to call flooding the zone. So he had Jill, he had 4 others, and at this point, I joined in this activity. I switched from lawyer to sports writer, working for the National Sports Daily, and I was trying to keep up with these 5 terrific reporters from SI and Sandy Padway, the great editor. Finally, the Commissioner's Office of Baseball, knowing that Sports Illustrated was on the trail, they decided they had to do something. The commissioner at the time was Peter Ueberroth. He's the guy who orchestrated the Los Angeles Olympics in '84, produced a profit-making Olympics, the only one in history, and was a genuinely capable sports executive. He was about to leave, and there was a new commissioner already selected to replace him, Angelo Bartlett Giamatti. Giamatti had been president of Yale. He, however, was a baseball junkie, as well as being a Renaissance scholar, and he could not resist an offer to become the commissioner of baseball, so he left Yale behind. Giamatti has a son, Paul. Some of you may have seen him. He's a terrific actor. He was in the series Billions, about the hedge fund manager. He was the U.S. attorney. This is another tangent, I'm sorry about it. But Giamatti was a fantastic writer, and he loved baseball. And I have to give you this quote from one of his essays about baseball. Genteel in its American origins, proletarian in its development, egalitarian in its demands and appeal, effortless in its adaptation to nature, raucous, hard-nosed, and glamorous as a profession, expanding with the country like fingers unfolding from a fist, image of a lost past, evergreen reminder of America's best promises. Baseball fitted and still fits America. It fits so well because it embodies the interplay of individual and group that we so love, and because it conserves our longing for the rule of law while licensing our resentment of lawgivers. Oh! That's literary stuff. And this is the guy who is now the commissioner of baseball. He had published dozens of essays like this about baseball. That's how the owners decided they wanted to have him on their side. So now we have a meeting, February of 1989, with Peter Rubloff, Bart Giamatti, and Giamatti's deputy, a lawyer by the name of Francis Vincent. Vincent took detailed notes of this meeting and put them all in a book several years later. We didn't know some of this at the time. As a reporter, I was aware of the meeting. I was hanging out with a bunch of other reporters waiting to try to talk to Giamatti or one of these guys after the meeting. They managed to avoid us all. But Rose shows up at this meeting. It's on Park Avenue in New York at the headquarters of Major League Baseball. And he comes into the conference room and he sees pictures on the wall of Joe DiMaggio, Jackie Robinson, Ty Cobb, Roberto Clemente, and his first question, "Where's my picture?" He's there in trouble. That's what he says. He is wearing a suit and a tie, and the suit was of a material that under different light turns different colors. It was an iridescent green suit with a red tie. And Vincent records all this in his notes in his book. The problem with the suit, in addition to the fact it was iridescent, was that it was a tailored suit, but it was tailored for Rose when he was 25 pounds lighter. So he's stuck in this suit. Curiously, O'Brien in the book never got into any of this, even though it was pretty well known. And what happened in the meeting is Peter Ueberroth wanted to smooth things over. He didn't want any trouble. He wanted the owners to have money coming in. He didn't want a big disruption. He didn't want any kind of trouble for anybody. So he said to Rose, stop gambling. If you stop, everything will be okay. And the meeting came to an end. Giamatti, the incoming commissioner, was not happy. He thought the rule was the rule, and he should be permanently ineligible for betting on baseball, just as Rule 21 suggests. And Giamatti took over, and to prove his case, he hired a man named John Dowd, a Washington lawyer. At one time, John Dowd was representing President Trump in his troubles with the various impeachments. He's a terrific lawyer, big guy, 6'5", experienced prosecutor, and a terrific lawyer, and Fay Vincent knew him from previous. Dowd did an amazing investigation in a matter of 3 months. He documented Rose's gambling on baseball. Paul Jansen, the guy who could rip his shirts, was a very happy witness because Rose refused to pay him what Rose owed him. So he knew he could get even by explaining things to John Dowd. John Dowd took a statement from Paul Jansen, 160 pages long, with the details on the bets. And the bets, during the first 3 months of the 1987 season, he bet on his team 51 times, always to win. Reds to win 51 times. Each bet was between $2,000 and $5,000. He would make 4 bets in an evening before the game began. Remember, he's the manager in this game. He would call them in just before the game, so they would total as much as $20,000 per evening, the bets. He won $432,000. He lost $420,000. So he actually made money betting on baseball. He lost money betting on football, basketball, and hockey. He knew nothing about hockey. He could not explain the icing rule to you. He knew nothing, but he had to bet. He could not help himself. He had to bet. So he's losing all this money, and the Giamatti gets the report from Dowd, and he bans Pete Rose for life. Now we're now going beyond what's in the book. I spent a lot of time on a case that was filed against Rose, a tax fraud case that ultimately put him in jail for 5 months. Looking closely at that case, you learn that, remember the 14 jersey he was wearing when he broke the record, and the black Mizuno bat? He sold the black Mizuno bat to 14 unsuspecting collectors. He sold the jersey a similar number of times. This gives you a look at the real Pete Rose. Failure to pay tax and to report that income is what put him away for 5 years. He did his time in the Marion Federal Penitentiary. There's a maximum security, Marion, and a minimum security. He was in the minimum security. As a reporter, I was there when he came out of the penitentiary. He was a shaken individual. Those 5 months were very, very bad for Pete Rose. If somebody tells you minimum security is club fed, no, he had a bad time. If he signed an autograph for a fellow prisoner, that was creating something of value. You're not allowed to do that as a prisoner, so he would be put in solitary for signing an autograph. He spent considerable time in solitary. Solitary, I can imagine, for a guy like Pete Rose, would be a most miserable situation. He came out, he was not himself. I remember actually feeling some empathy, some sympathy for what he had gone through when he came out of that minimum security camp. So what we have is one of the greatest ball players of all time. He was what we sometimes call a degenerate gambler. He literally could not stop. He knew he should stop, and he couldn't do it. He needed to be in treatment. He needed a 12-step program. He needed a sponsor to help him do this. He did none of that. He just could not stop. He was a certified womanizer. He basically was a thug who hung out with other thugs, all those guys at Gold's Gym. There is some evidence in the book that he used corked bats during the final hits that led to the record. There is also some evidence of use of amphetamines. There are people who insist he was using steroids. I don't think that's true. And he clearly had tendencies toward misogyny. At one point, there was a year when he was the most valuable player in the National League and in the World Series, and he was given the so-called Hickok Award, which is given to the greatest professional athlete in any sport of that year. It's a belt that has precious and semi-precious stones embedded in it, and it was given to him, the only baseball player other than DiMaggio who ever got this. And what does he do with it? Remember Tommy Giosa, his gopher. He has Tommy remove the stones and have them made into gifts for his various girlfriends, and replaces the stones with fakes and then sells the belt. Entrepreneurial in his own way. Keith O'Brien finally tells us that as he worked on this biography, he found himself on, quote, the screaming void of madness on the edge of Pete's universe. A great sentence. And so now we know why Keith O'Brien told us at the beginning of the book that he did this book with pride, disgust, frustration, pity, and confusion. Now quickly, on the other books, The Football Game That Changed America is the story of the Super Bowl. It's fascinating in many ways. I am not sure how many people really want this level of detail on the Super Bowl, but it's there. What he misses is the history of the ads on the Super Bowl. The ads typically in the Super Bowl are terrific. They're the brand new campaigns that all these big companies, they were not so terrific this past year, but if you wanted 30 seconds of advertising on the Super Bowl, you paid $8 million. If you wanted a minute, it was twice that. The Super Bowl has the largest audience in television history. If you rank the 100 biggest audiences in the history of television, the Super Bowl has 93 of them. This past Super Bowl, $600 million was spent on commercials. It's an extravaganza like no other. The halftime show draws its own audience, although I must admit I could not watch this one the last time. Bring back Paul McCartney, something, do something. The history of the game is somewhat fascinating. The first big one was in 1933 when Bronco Nagurski led the Bears to a win over the Giants. So as a Bear fan, I just had to mention that. I couldn't let that go by. The audience for the Super Bowl is 49% female, which is a surprise to some people. The most historic Super Bowl was the one that Joe Namath won in 1969, promising to win for the New York Jets. The other book, I want to leave some time for questions here. The other book is The Stadium. It's as you see the title there. It's by a professor of African American Studies at Columbia University. A stadium, as he explains vividly, is a place where amazing things happen. Lou Gehrig retired. The Beatles performed. Billy Graham preached. George W. Bush showed defiance in a baseball stadium after 9/11. It is the great stage for a lot of American cultures. The first great stadiums built were Yankee Stadium in New York and the University of Michigan Stadium, now known as the Big House. The Big House on a Saturday afternoon has 120,000 people at a college football game. There are 24 elevators in the Big House to get people up to the luxury boxes that are on top. This writer goes through the various racial issues that are a part of all this, a lot of municipal politics. He offers an amazing example. We had a Secretary of the Interior under John F. Kennedy who told the then Washington Redskins that they could not play another game in the stadium in the District of Columbia unless they let their black players play, which they were not going to do. Kind of a racial turning point. Interesting book, but again, important for a guy like me working in the industry, not the easiest read that you would ever have. So I highly recommend the Pete Rose book as a gift for somebody who's interested in baseball, a son, a grandson, uncle, anybody. It's a very readable. It also has some fantastic black and white pictures. including a couple of the girlfriends. I don't know exactly how he did that, but okay, questions? Yeah, George.
Getting back to Batavia, does Ken Anderson ever have a shot at getting in the Football Hall of Fame?
Ken Anderson in the Hall of Fame. Ken Anderson was a star here at Batavia. He played for Cincinnati, I believe, was an excellent quarterback.
Super Bowl.
Was in a Super Bowl. I think the time has passed for him. In the Football Hall of Fame, they do not have an old-timers procedure like they do in the baseball. If they had that, he would be on the ballot, certainly. And the football writers who have those votes, I do not have a vote. I never did. They are very demanding on the. Anderson, though, he's got fantastic numbers. He probably belongs there, but I don't see him getting in. Good question. Catherine.
Back to Pete Rose. He broke Ty Cobb's record in Cincinnati. The game before that was at Wrigley.
Yes.
In September of '85. Cub fans will know that was pre-nightlights. About the 7th inning, it started getting really, really dark, and it rained. I stayed in my seat because I had a poncho. I didn't want to get my seat wet. My friend went into the concourse, and Pete's on the catwalk visiting with all the fans.
Typical.
Only one person had to get on base for Pete Rose to come back again to bat. So nobody left. Ultimately, the game resumed. Somebody got on base. Pete did come to bat, and he was called out looking for the last out. He went back to the dugout and later said in an interview, his son Petey, blonde kid who was traveling with him on this momentous occasion, said, "What was it?" And Pete said, "It sounded like a strike."
It sounded like a strike.
Because it was so dark.
Catherine offers a Pete Rose at bat just before he broke the record. He was in Wrigley Field. It's documented in the book, right? Just as you.
Is it?
Yes, just as you described. And he took a called third strike. Interestingly, as he was approaching the record, this reminds me, if a pitcher walked Rose, let's say in that Cub game the day before, if the Cub pitcher walked Rose, the fans in Wrigley Field would be booing. They wanted to see Rose get this hit. It was a big deal, a huge record. And then after this, he went back to Cincinnati, so he broke the record in his home field.
As he should have.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. There were pitchers who walked him who were explaining that for the rest of their lives. Amazing, amazing. Yes?
I guess if you compare various professional sports, you look at the NBA, you got Wilt Chamberlain, you got Michael Jordan, you have in hockey Bobby Hull, in football you have Alex Kears and Paul Horney.
Yeah.
I think all these people had questionable professional careers as it relates to improprieties. And I'm just wondering if to level the playing field, we should look at all these athletes as athletes alone and their records and their performance, because it becomes so divisive, I think, in a way, trying to determine who is morally appropriate to be in a Hall of Fame. I don't know if we'll ever get to a conclusion on this, but I think baseball is a little bit selective. I see now with Roger Clemens and Rodriguez and some of these people, Sammy Sosa. I mean, it's the era they live in. You think Mel Ott would get in today, or Ty Cobb would get in today with their careers and the way they treated people?
Yeah.
There's an inconsistency, so I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
Okay, the question raises the dilemma of, do you have to be a great player, and a good citizen to get into a Hall of Fame? Or should we just take in great players regardless of their poor citizenship? A very interesting issue that is debated all the time. And there are many examples of people in Halls of Fame who, if you were to look at the rest of their lives, no, you don't want anything to do with them. And as he says that there right now we have the steroid players, Alex Rodriguez, Barry Bonds, Sammy Sosa, Clemens, who are clearly qualified for the Hall of Fame, but had been voted down because they were cheating with performance-enhancing drugs. In the case of Rose, he was banned for life. So he's now eligible for the Hall of Fame. See, you forgot you were watching a lawyer up here. Banned for life, now eligible. So will the writers vote him in? Good question. It'll be close. It'll be close. Yes?
Yes, you did a great job of describing the addictive nature of gambling. And now we got baseball coddling up to the gambling industry. Will the sports writers, will anybody challenge that? Because look what's going on with young people today. We got college kids sitting in the dorm room all day gambling on a telephone.
Thank you for the question. What about sports gambling? What's going to happen, basically? And I'm going to give you a self-advertisement. I have a speech I've been giving at various places called The Menace of Sports Gambling. That kind of tells you where I'm going on this. It is a frightening situation. These ads that you see, DraftKings, FanDuel, MGM, ESPN, my former employer, those ads are aimed at young men. They are exploiting their vulnerabilities, and they are setting people up for addiction. Sports gambling is an addiction industry, just like opioids or tobacco, except it's completely unregulated. It's growing like crazy. And you can bet on anything, anytime, anywhere. For the Super Bowl, you could make a bet on how long the singing of the national anthem would take. Stuff like that. These are so-called proposition bets. There have already been a number of athletes who have had trouble, some lifetime bans because of gambling. There will be more, and there will be many lives that are disrupted because of addictive gambling on sports. So we're heading down a very dark path here. There's now class actions in Boston trying to stop some of this. At some point, state governments will figure out that the cost of this, they'll get a measure of the cost. Here in Illinois, the only thing that has happened is once Governor Pritzker and the General Assembly figured out how big it was, they raised the tax on it from 15% to 35% to get their share. Something else, it's going to become a public health problem, and something is going to have to give. Yes.
Where do you think the Bears Stadium is going to end up?
Where do I think the Bears Stadium will be? The Bears Stadium will be in Arlington Heights. I was at a retirement party for a lawyer in Arlington Heights a couple of weeks ago, and I had a wonderful conversation with the mayor of Arlington Heights. He's going out of office. His successor was there also. The two mayors agree that the family, the Hallis McCaskey family, wants Arlington Heights. They are the ones who will decide. The president of the team, Kevin Warren by name, has delusions of building on the lakefront. It will not happen. There is no support among political people for any subsidy for the Chicago Bears. And Warren if he persists in this much longer, the family is going to become impatient, and there may be a new CEO for the family of the Chicago Bears. But there's no doubt it's going to be in Arlington Heights. The question is, when will it open? It'll be three years anyway. Yes?
A comment and then a question. I went to high school in Arlington Heights, and in my St. Viator High School, and in my class was George Hallis's grandson, George Hallis, and of course he played football for the St. Viator High School. But,
Yeah.
so it was interesting, because they live in Des Plaines or something like that.
The grandson is named George Hallis McCaskey. I'm acquainted with him. He is a lawyer by profession. He's currently the sibling in charge of the team. He and I, at one point, were going to start the Recovering Lawyers Association. People who managed to leave the practice and do something they liked. We never did that, but he's a genuinely good guy, devout, daily communicant in his Catholic parish. I have some regard for him. I know that he will be supporting Arlington Heights. I had a friend for a long time, Chet Kopic, some of you may remember him, sportscaster. He had access to that family through his father. And we used to get great information on the family from Chet, but Chet is not with us, and so we're kind of guessing a lot on these things. Okay, behind George, there's a guy behind.
Hi, Jose Canseco wrote a tell-all book about his steroid use, and he named other players.
Yep.
It was investigated. I remember at the time that Rose made references to, hey, I'm not the only one betting on baseball. You should look into the owners or something along those lines. Was there a lot of, any information to suggest that owners were
The question is,
calling each other on the phone and making big bets with each other?
among the owners.
Yeah, they're all very rich.
The question is, was there gambling among the owners? One of Rose's perpetual comments is, everybody was doing what I was doing. Why was I singled out? And there was a time when there were a couple of gamblers among owners of the NFL. A guy named Galbraith owned racehorses and was himself a bookie. He owned the Pittsburgh Steelers. There was another guy who had a big interest in the Eagles. Those days are gone. Now the owners are genuine billionaires. They have car dealers. They are in private equity. The most recent purchaser of a sports team, David Rubenstein, is a huge private equity guy. He bought the Baltimore Orioles with pocket change that he had. I think there may be some friendly bets. I'll bet you dinner, but no major gambling among the owners. They are making money off gambling, but they're not involved. Yeah, okay.
I guess I'll just tell a story here, picking up on the young lady that was at that ball game when he made the last stop. Okay, I was at that game as well with my 11-year-old son.
This is kind of amazing.
And Charlie Hustle has been his favorite ball player, notwithstanding anything that ever happened. We were even talking about it on Tuesday morning at 5 a.m. watching the ball game.
The Cub game, yeah.
So this is what happens when you breed a baseball fan. When you were talking about getting that hit in Cincinnati subsequently, I sent him a text. Who was the pitcher? I get back, Eric Shaw.
Eric Shaw, yeah.
The guy
In
that
addition,
Yeah.
Carmelo Martinez fielded the ball and left from center field.
Oh, that I didn't remember.
Steve Garvey was at first base.
Yeah,
Okay?
yeah.
And oh, by the way, Steve Garvey was also at first base when Hank Aaron broke the record. Just a little aside. He says, anything else you want to know?
Is Steve Garvey going to run for the Senate in California?
I don't think he knows that. But I will tell you, we are breeding baseball players in your family. As a proud grandfather, I have a 6'7", 220-pound, 17-year-old at Oswego High School who will be pitching today, and he's left-handed.
Oh, boy. Watch out for him. All right.
And his a sister school, East Oswego, a couple years ago, if you're a Sox fan, I saw a jersey here. They drafted this kid, Noah is his first name, big left-hander, 6'9". He got $8.5 million to sign with the White Sox. So he and his dad and me are just kind of drooling here, waiting for something.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Okay.
Picking up on that segue, I was embarrassed to ask, do you have any words of encouragement, more for your wisdom, for a handful of us that are Sox fans?
Yeah, the White Sox cannot do any worse than last year. That's about the best I can say. The new manager and I are graduates of the same university. I have that interest in him. I think he'll do a good job. He's been waiting to do this for a long time, and there's got to be hope in there somewhere. You know, if you're a Cub fan, you're always hopeful. Sox fans are more demanding. Yeah.
But if you did like to bet on baseball, you could have bet against your team. Made some money.
That is an interesting thing. John Dowd is the guy who did the investigation. He had Rose betting his team to win 51 times. He refused to say to any of us in the media whether Rose ever bet against his team. Later, Dowd made a speech in Washington to a bunch of baseball sabermetricians, they're called. They study baseball numbers. These guys are real dorks. They spend their time going over numbers. He told that group that Rose bet against the Padres in 3 games in San Diego during that period of time. He didn't know there was a Wall Street Journal reporter among the sabermetricians. So that's how we get the fact that Rose did bet against this team. So here's a guy, he's in charge of who's pitching, he's got to bet against the team. Maybe that's how he made the $20,000 profit. Who knows? George.
On the current state of baseball, the pitch clock, they were playing with the challenges, the robot umpires, etc. What are your thoughts about where baseball is going?
Well, the pitch clock to me has been terrific. I thought I would not like it, but I watched a number of games last season, and I was impressed with the effect of the pitch clock on the game. The bigger bases, I'm not sure, made a big difference. And the robot umpires kind of scare me. I'm old. I'm not into major technology. I would like to keep the umpires for a few years until I'm gone, and then they can do it. Okay, thank you, everybody.